I never told my daughter about the safe deposit box at First National. Not when she graduated from nursing school, not when she bought her first car, not even when she stood at the altar and married a man I didn't trust from the moment he shook my hand. Too firm, too practiced, the kind of handshake a man gives when he's auditioning for something. My wife Lorraine set up that box 11 years before she passed. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to gone. That's how fast it took her. But Lorraine was the kind of woman who spent her whole life thinking 3 moves ahead, and even in those 6 weeks, she was planning. "You'll know when to use it," she told me. She was sitting up in the hospital bed, still wearing the pearl earrings she never took off, talking to me like she had all the time in the world. "Don't tell Audrey yet. She's not ready." I didn't argue. I never argued with Lorraine when she had that look. So I kept the secret, and I kept going to that branch on Maple Street every year on her birthday, just to check that everything was still in order. The manager there, a quiet man named Ed, well, not the Ed from my life, just the fellow behind the counter. He probably thought I was eccentric. Maybe I was. But I made a promise to my wife, and I intended to keep it. Audrey was 34 when she brought Tanner home for dinner. I remember standing at the stove, stirring the chili I'd been making every Sunday since 1987, and hearing the front door open. Audrey called out, "Dad, we're here!" And there was a lightness in her voice I hadn't heard in a while. That alone made me want to like him. I didn't. He walked into my kitchen like he was appraising it. I've owned my home for 31 years. It's not a mansion, 3 bedrooms, a good-sized yard, the kind of house where you can hear the furnace kick on at night. But it's paid off, well kept, and it's mine. Tanner looked around at the way people look at something they're calculating the value of. We shook hands. I mentioned the handshake already. Dinner was fine on the surface. He was charming enough. Good-looking in that polished way. Asked me thoughtful questions about my years as a logistics manager. Nodded at the right times. But twice during the meal, he turned the conversation toward money in ways that felt off. Once when I mentioned that Audrey's grandfather had left her a small trust. Once when I said I'd been thinking about downsizing. He was listening too carefully. After he left, I washed the dishes and thought about Lorraine. I thought about what she would have said, probably something quiet and precise that would have landed like a stone in still water. I didn't say anything to Audrey. She was happy, and she was 34 years old and had every right to make her own choices. They got engaged 8 months later. The wedding was the first real alarm bell. Audrey had always been sensible with money. She drove a 5-year-old Honda, brought lunch to work, never carried a credit card balance. The girl who grew up in my house understood the value of $1. So when she called me in January to tell me they were looking at venues, and the one they really loved was a lakeside estate in Lake Geneva that started at $40,000 just for the space, I paused. "That's before catering," she said, and there was a slight hesitation in her voice, like she already knew what I was going to say. "Audrey," I said carefully, "is that what you want, or is that what he wants?" Silence. Then, "We both want it, Dad. I contributed $20,000 toward the wedding because she is my daughter, and I love her, and Lorraine would have wanted me to. I watched the budget climb from $60,000 to $85,000, and then somehow to $110,000. The flowers alone were $12,000. $12,000 for arrangements that would be wilting by Monday morning. Tanner's family contributed nothing. He had explained this early on. His parents were going through some things. He'd grown up modestly. He was working in real estate development, building something from the ground up, very entrepreneurial, very vision-forward. I'd been in logistics for 30 years, and I knew what it looked like when someone was moving things from one place to another without actually producing anything. Tanner moved money, other people's money. I had an attorney I trusted, a woman I'd worked with during a property dispute years back. About 4 months before the wedding, I sat across from her desk and I told her everything: the house, the investments, the pension, the annuity from my former employer, the safe deposit box, all of it. She helped me restructure, not to hide anything illegal. Everything was above board, documented, transparent to any court that might ever want to see it. But assets I owned outright were moved into a revocable trust with specific provisions. The house was retitled. The investments were reorganized. Everything that would go to Audrey eventually was structured so that it would go to her, and only her, in a way that could not be commingled with marital property. Then I had a conversation with Audrey about a prenuptial agreement. That conversation was harder than anything, except telling her that her mother had died. She cried. She said I didn't trust her. I told her I trusted her completely, and that the agreement wasn't about her at all. It was about protecting what her mother had spent a lifetime building, what I had spent a lifetime building, so that it would still be there for her if she ever needed it, regardless of what happened with her marriage. "What do you think is going to happen, Dad?" she asked. "I don't think anything," I said. "I hope for the best. But I'm 63 years old, and I've watched enough people lose everything because they didn't do the paperwork." She agreed to ask him. Tanner signed the prenuptial agreement without reading it carefully. I know because my attorney was there, and she told me afterward that he glanced at the first page, flipped to the signature line, and signed. She said he seemed almost amused, like it was a formality he was humoring the old man with. That told me more than an hour of conversation would have. They married in September. The lake was beautiful. Audrey cried when she saw the flowers. I danced with her to the song she and Lorraine had picked out together years ago, just in case, because Lorraine always thought 3 moves ahead. I held my daughter and I didn't think about Tanner once for those 3 minutes. The first year was fine, mostly. He got a commission from a development project in the fall. Bought himself a truck, a $72,000 truck, which I know because Audrey mentioned it with a particular flatness in her voice that told me she hadn't been consulted. He started talking about wanting to move to a bigger apartment. Their current place was a very nice 2-bedroom in a good part of the city. He wanted a doorman building. He'd seen one that had a unit for $4,200 a month. Audrey was working 40 hours a week as a nurse, taking overnight shifts, coming home tired. She paid half of everything, always had. She didn't say any of this to me directly. I pieced it together from small things. The way she changed the subject when I asked how things were going. The way she started looking a little thin. I didn't push. I was her father, not her warden. In the spring, I flew out to visit my old college friend up in Vermont. We'd been trying to schedule it for 3 years and we finally managed it. I was there for 5 days. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was my son-in-law, not Audrey, Tanner. He wanted to talk about the family estate, his words, and whether I had considered putting the house in both our names to simplify things down the line. He framed it as being considerate, planning ahead, reducing probate complications. I was sitting on my friend's back porch looking at the Green Mountains when he said this. I took a slow breath. "Tanner," I said, "I appreciate you thinking ahead. But my estate is handled by an attorney. Everything is in order, and I'm not planning to make any changes." A beat. Then he said, very smoothly, that he understood, and that he'd just been doing some reading and thought it might be worth a conversation. I said I was glad he was reading. I said I had to go. I hung up and sat there for a while. I called my attorney from the porch. I told her about the call. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'll make sure everything is airtight." When I got home, I drove to First National on Maple Street. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes. Then I went inside and I asked to access my box. I sat in the little room they give you and I opened it, and I looked at what Lorraine had put there. The documents organized in her precise handwriting. The letter she'd written to Audrey that I was instructed to give her when the time is right. A photograph of the 3 of us at Audrey's college graduation, Lorraine in the yellow dress she loved, and a smaller envelope addressed to me, which I'd read once before and carried in my chest ever since. I put everything back. I locked the box. I thanked the young man at the counter and I drove home. 3 weeks later, Audrey called me and I could tell from the first word that something had broken. She'd found a folder on his laptop. He'd left it open by accident, or maybe he'd gotten careless, which was more likely. Spreadsheets, accounts, credit cards she hadn't known existed, opened in both their names in some cases, in his alone in others. A balance of $63,000 across 4 cards. A payment plan for the truck that she was listed on without her signature, or with a signature that wasn't hers. She came to my house that night. I made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table where she'd done her homework for 12 years, and she told me all of it. I listened. I did not say "I told you so." I did not say a single word that could be interpreted as "I told you so." I handed her tissues and I refilled her coffee, and I let her talk until there was nothing left to say. Then I told her about the safe deposit box. Not everything, not yet. Just that it existed, and that her mother had left something for her there, and that I thought it might be time. She stared at me. "Mom knew?" she said. "Your mother knew many things," I said. She was smarter than both of us put together. We went the next morning, a Thursday. Audrey wore her scrubs because she had a shift that afternoon. We sat in the little room and I opened the box and I handed her the envelope with her name on it. She read it slowly. I watched her face move through about 7 different expressions. When she finished, she put the letter down on the table very carefully, the way you put down something fragile, and she sat quietly for a moment. "She wrote this 11 years ago," she said. "The month before she died," I said. The letter was Lorraine being Lorraine, practical and loving in equal measure. She'd written about the trust she and I had set up for Audrey, the one that existed independent of whatever I might have or own, a separate pool of assets that had been growing for 11 years since Lorraine's life insurance settlement, and some investments she'd made quietly in the late 90s and never talked much about. It was not a fortune, but it was significant, more than Audrey had known about, more, certainly, than Tanner had known about. The letter explained that this money was Audrey's alone, always had been, always would be. Lorraine had structured it so that it was completely protected from any marital claim. An attorney had reviewed it. Another attorney had reviewed it after that. And then there was the part that made Audrey press her hand over her mouth. Lorraine had written, "I don't know who you'll love or what your life will look like by the time you read this. I hope it's wonderful. But if something has gone wrong, if you're sitting in this little room because you needed to come here, then I want you to know that we thought of you. We always thought of you. And you are not starting over from nothing. You are starting over from a foundation that no one can take from you." I looked at the wall while Audrey cried. I'd read those words before. They still got me. When she was ready, we went through the rest of the documents. My attorney had already sent Tanner a formal letter regarding the credit cards and the fraudulent signature on the loan documents. The police report for the forged signature had been filed that morning. My attorney did not play around. Tanner called me that evening. He was not smooth this time. He said I had made a terrible mistake. He said I was interfering in his marriage. He said Audrey would thank him someday for the life he was trying to build for them. I said, "Tanner, the prenuptial agreement you signed protects Audrey's inheritance completely. The trust her mother established is not marital property, and never was. The house is in a revocable trust that names only my daughter as beneficiary, with provisions that exclude spousal claims. My attorney has already been in contact with yours, if you have one, and the matter of the forged signature is now in the hands of the county sheriff's office." He hung up. The divorce was filed 6 weeks later. It was not clean, but it was faster than it could have been, largely because he had nothing to fight with. He had a truck with negative equity, and a stack of credit card debt, and a prenup he'd signed without reading. His attorney apparently was not pleased with him. Audrey came through it. She came through it like her mother's daughter, which means she did it quietly, and without falling apart, and with a stubbornness that I have always found beautiful in her. She's living in a good apartment now, closer to the hospital. She calls me on Sundays. Last month she came over, and we made Lorraine's chili recipe together, and ate it at the kitchen table, and she asked me to tell her stories about her mother that she hadn't heard before, and I told her about the first time. Lorraine and I drove cross-country in a car with no air conditioning in August of 1981, and we laughed until my eyes watered. At one point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Did you always know it would go this way?" she said. I thought about it honestly. "I hoped it wouldn't have to," I said. "Your mother hoped so too, but she wanted to make sure that if it did, you'd be okay." Audrey nodded. She looked down at the table for a moment. "The letter," she said. "She wrote that she was sorry she couldn't be there." "I know," I said. "But in a way," Audrey said slowly, "she kind of was." I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. I just held onto her hand and we sat there in the kitchen that smells like 31 years of Sunday dinners. And outside the window, the neighbor's oak tree was doing what it does every November, dropping leaves across the yard that I will get to eventually. And the furnace kicked on the way it always does. And everything was quiet and exactly where it was supposed to be. Some things you protect for years before you know why. Then one day you understand, and you're grateful you never stopped.